Okay, so Hugo, that old is quite a good segue to the thing we want to talk about next. And actually, Jungle Cruise is too, because it has some de-aging work in it
Yeah.
when we do a flashback with The Rock. And old, of course, I don't think it has aging makeup or digital makeup, but it might. We want to talk about de-aging. I think both you and I noticed that it just forms a part of so many of these big films at the moment
Yeah.
in terms of being able to show flashbacks of the actors 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Um, and the technology is there. And also, interestingly, many studios are doing it, which we'll get to. But it's an interesting thing, isn't it? It's been around for a while, Hugo, but it's really ballooning right now as an effect, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Now, I really looking forward to this conversation because this is now becoming completely normal, But a few years ago, it wasn't. Like, I still kind of remember. I think the first time I really got in touch with this kind of thing was on The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. I think that was the first time I've started noticing it more heavily, especially because I must say anyone should go and check it. The Blu-ray, the two-disc Blu-ray edition of
Mm.
Curious Case of Benjamin Button, like usual, David Fincher's films have a lot of extras usually. It has some stunning production behind the scenes and visual effects featurettes to watch there. Really high quality stuff that they've made for that Blu-ray, and really showcases how they've done it. And also Digital Domain has some really nice behind the scenes. But I think that film was really the first time that I started really noticing that this was
What?
possible. I know there's before
Yeah.
that, but I think when
Mm.
it became possible and it became for real on certain moments, I think that's when it
Yeah.
tricked me a bit.
But interestingly, you're bringing up a film that used different techniques of aging
Yeah,
and de-aging.
yeah, yeah,
So obviously, Digital Domain did a fully digital Benjamin Button
yeah.
based on Brad Pitt, sorta, but because he becomes an old man. And it was basically a fully digital rendered face, head,
I'm more talking
right?
about not that.
But
I'm more talking
no,
about
I
the
didn't
other.
think you were.
Yeah, yeah,
I think the other thing that was done to show when Brad Pitt was getting younger,
exactly.
but he was younger than what Brad Pitt was at a certain time and
Yeah,
Kate Blanchett was at a certain time, was Lola
yeah,
VFX,
yeah.
very famous VFX studio in aging and de-aging, doing that work. They had done a few years earlier some amazing stuff for X-Men, um, which
Last
the
stand.
one that no one
Yeah,
likes.
It's last stand. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but they had done obviously this amazing sequence with Ian McKellen and
But I know it. That
the,
that
the
yeah,
the
that was the
Patrick
first
Stewart
time.
and Ian McKellen
Yeah,
de-aging was brilliant.
yeah,
Lola had been doing it as part of hydraulics, and we can that's a separate history, but
yeah,
they'd been doing beauty work for a long time.
yeah.
Blemish fixes, other kind of things that they're never allowed to talk about.
Oh yeah,
And I think it was really that X-Men film that showcased what they could do,
yeah.
and it blew people away, right?
Yeah, it did. It did. I think that's the thing. We that was the first time we seen it for real, and they talked about it, they showed it, there were breakdowns. That's why I'm remembering it so much from
Yeah.
Benjamin Button and also from X Men, because man, at that time I was at. I think I was at the mill. It was in 2011. Yeah, I was at the mill from 2011 to 2016. So at the mill, like we did, as you know, the mill is very known for commercials, and we worked on a lot of projects that we will never be able to talk about. So de aging has been around for. We had people at the mill from flame artists to nuke artists on my department that were specialized on this and have been doing de aging for like 20 years. So de aging, paint work, and painting wrinkles and painting like floppy arms and things like that has been happening for decades on music videos, on
Yeah.
commercials, on films, on a lot of things, even to this day. It's just that a lot of times they can't talk about it. And I think this was the first time Lola really showcased it. And that's why it
Yeah.
was
Well,
mind blowing.
yeah. And just to be clear, you say de-aging, but I think you mean beauty work,
Yes,
as in
sorry. Yeah.
fixes.
Well,
Yeah.
sometimes at the mill we used to do the aging as well. We did a lot of that as well. We also did full CG versions of Bruce Lee and full CG. We did those kind of things, but
Yes.
but we did a mixture of the aging and beauty, but also like making people younger. That was, removing second
Yeah.
chins, removing wrinkles, removing. And a lot of times there were artists and there were TV shows and even like commercials and even music videos where we did it on every time they showed up. So that means that everyone saw them like this. There's also extensive de-aging and beautification working happening in India as well, in a lot of Bollywood movies as well. And actually the most famous actor in the world in Bollywood, he's very de-aged in all his films as well because he's quite old already. So that happens as well. So these things have been around, like you said, for a long time. It's just that now we get to talk about them, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean that X-Men film and Benjamin Button is 2006 and 2008.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it's been happening, and we can talk about all those. But what we really wanted to talk about was it's now like the writers of these Marvel films and other films, there's no holding back if they need to do a flashback sequence or put an actor.
Yeah.
I just feel like that. Every Marvel film seems to have a flashback. And it's cleverly done. That way of showing a young Tony Stark in one of the films, I'm forgetting which one it is. That's really bad of me.
It's one of the Captain Americas. It's on I think it's Winter Soldier. He shows up on the beginning with the hologram, the big hologram, and he's there watching his parents and
and that's a Lola effect.
Yeah.
Or the way that Black Widow has the children sequence, but with a young Rachel Weisz and young David Harbour, is also brilliantly woven into the film. So it's not like I'm saying it's gratuitous, but I feel like they can just do it now, so they go for it.
Yeah,
right. That's how I sort of feel about
they
it.
really do. And this again, like it has a. I don't want to spend too much time. I wanted to talk to you more about the visual effects and the different techniques that are out there to do this. I did, but I want to just mention that this does open another can of worms in terms. We've briefly talked about this before. Opens a can of worms about dead actors, and it opens a can of worms of actors spending more time in screen than they are getting older and older, and now they're getting younger and younger on the film. So there's that side of things, which sometimes I don't like. I feel like sometimes it would be nice to just have new generations coming in, and sometimes I feel like it's a bit forced to just bring people, making people younger in films for the sake of it. Like I feel like in some films that happens, not to say that the ones we've mentioned do that. I think Marvel has really used it in a really nice way and really presented this effect in a really nice way inside the plot. Like you said, it was really well written. So,
but your issue is more an ethical thing, or what?
Yeah, it's an ethical. My issue is that it feels to me like it's not so much that I have a problem with it, Ian. It's more about, it kind of comes to mind this film called The Congress, which kind of deals with that, where it's not a spoiler, people should have seen the film by now, but it's a really good film, by the way. You should go and watch it. But she gets digitized so that she becomes an actress in a virtual set, and then she won't do films anymore. I'm a bit worried that these corporations could start making digital versions, complete digital versions, just to prolong franchises and prolong actors' lifespan even after they're dead, or even making them younger and younger and younger. When I kind of feel like I like the freshness of new people coming in. I like that we have a generation that goes away and then a new generation comes out. So it's not that I have a big problem with it. It's just that there are some consequences to this. It will be harder to find more actors. It will be harder to have new people coming in because we'll keep going to the old people all the time. I'm just a bit concerned about that. And that film really made me think about that, about the fact that she becomes digital,
Here's the issue, though, which is sort of nuanced on the concept of creating a completely digital version of Robert Downey Jr. Versus de-aging him. So if the plot calls for a young Tony Stark, right, Robert Downey Jr. plays that part.
I know.
As an older man.
I know.
And so we're not taking the job away from...
No, I'm talking about the future. I'm talking about in 20 years from now, when they will want to
Sure.
put Robert Downey Jr. on the film, and maybe in 30 years he's dead, and they want to still put him on the film anyway. That's what I'm
But
talking
is
about.
that, yeah. I mean, that's a slightly different thing. That's more like
I know.
resurrecting a dead
Yes.
celebrity
Yeah.
rather than de-aging. But I know
Yeah.
what you're getting at because, of course, there are some films in it that we were going to talk about, like Gemini Man,
Yeah.
which is a completely digital young Will Smith,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Although it
they
was acted
can
by
do it.
him. It was acted by
Exactly.
him. Yeah.
Exactly.
The,
Exactly. And so they're copying, I
yeah.
mean, they're basing the performance off the real actor.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't create exactly the same kind of problems as if you resurrect a dead celebrity or dead actor,
Yeah.
which clearly some of these films have done. And whether or not that
Yeah.
actor would want to do it,
Yeah.
we don't know. But
I don't want,
know.
like, we've talked about this before, and I'm sure this will be a topic again, and this has been a very hot topic on even on my Twitch streams as well when I do my call-ins. Just last week we did a huge very candid conversation about deep fakes and about this, but I wanted to focus my attention in one thing here, because if you think about Gemini Man and you think about The Irishman, which I think for me, or probably the most recent, most impressive versions of two completely different pipelines to do the same thing. Gemini Man, as you said, a bit more full CG, although it does have the base mocap and rig, the head rig with the tracking markers on the face for Will Smith. So it's still Will Smith acting Will Smith of a younger version, and then it's the typical A-B where you shoot one plate and then you shoot the other plate and then you have both versions. So you have stand-in actors, but it's still Will Smith playing himself. So that's one version. And then I have the other pipeline, which is the Martin Scorsese approach with Irishman, which is nothing on set. He doesn't want any disturbance. He doesn't want anything, no markers, no dots, no interference on the performance, because he's a much more old school director, and he doesn't like that part, to have so much technology on the set, as opposed to Ang Lee, which is a very high technology director as well, and he loves this technology to a point that, just as a side note, if you guys haven't watched it, Gemini Man was out at 120 frames per second. And not a lot of people watched that version, but the film was made at 120 frames per second per eye in 3D, which is 240 frames per second of CG in 4K. It is mind-blowing, and they should have just given an Oscar to that. It is mind-blowing to think.
I never got to see that.
I didn't either. Unfortunately, I only got to see the 60 version, 60 frames per second version. Never got to see the 120. There was no cinema here broadcasting it, but it is a brute force thing, because it's like a lot of data, a lot of CG, and it looks photoreal. But I don't want to talk about that. But I do recommend people, at least if they could, the Blu-ray has the 60 version, already is a bit closer to what this Vision was. It is really nice to see the 60 version. It becomes much more real. If you watch the Blu-ray 4K at 60, it becomes much more real. It becomes even more photoreal Will Smith. It's different to watch it at 60. I really love that version of the film. Wish I could see the 120. But I want to focus about this because me, I'm an old guy. I'm an old school guy. I do like the approach that Martin Scorsese did. I love when we're on set and we don't care or even know that VFX are there. I love that aspect of it. And then I do, because I like
Hugo.
I do, so I do enjoy that side, but I also love the version that Gemini Man approaches with, which again, like I said, it's very different. One is full CG animation driven mocap, and the other one is no animation, just the performance being enhanced by this rig of 3 cameras and 2 cameras sometimes, and the pipeline they use called Flux, I believe. So I wanted to talk about these two approaches and the ways that they're evolving, because it is two different, very different methods of doing the same exact thing,
Yes, and the third approach is compositing, and we'll get to that as well. I think a little bit.
Yeah.
With the Irishman, where most of the de-aging was done by ILM with their Flux system, I would say you're right. He didn't want a head HMC or tracking markers. Yeah. But the existence of the 3 cameras there, and the infrared camera, and the approach to capture the movement of the face. I mean, that's a pretty big tech footprint on a set,
It
but it's
is and
not the
it's
same as having
not.
an HMC
Yeah,
in front of your
it's
face,
not for
actor's
him
face.
because he's used to the 3D,
Mm,
especially in Hugo and other films he's
sure,
done. He's used to the 3D
sure.
rigs, which are huge with the mirror and the two rigs. So, and
Yeah,
also these days you can have rigs that are really fluid, and you can see that on the behind the scenes. That thing moves like normal, like it doesn't really have
yeah,
any issues. It can be on the rig, it can be on the boom, could be on everywhere. I don't think it could be on a Steadicam. I think that's a bit pushing it. It's a bit too heavy, but and I don't
yeah.
we don't see it on the Steadicam. But it's a similar approach to even David Fincher. He also has this idea, like he has these big rigs as well. I don't think that's a I feel like for the actors is more intimate to be on a location with no markers, not nothing, and they can really go into their character. Because do you imagine like acting? I'm not an actor, so I don't imagine, but imagining like acting against someone with dots and like a big camera in front of them, you can't even be close to them, because they have this camera, like Will
Yeah.
Smith. You see with the little that like there's this thing coming out of the headphones, and then the camera is in front of them. You can't even get very close to them. Even on a fighting sequence, it probably is tricky to even have that thing flying around.
I don't think they used it all the time
No,
in
no, no,
Gemini
no,
Man.
no. They
It's
didn't. No, no.
you know
You're right.
Weta Digital, which championed that.
Yeah,
I'm in total agreement with you, except for the fact is they're very different techniques for different made for different
yeah,
processes and directors. One of the interesting things though is there is probably some commentary that both approaches had good and bad results.
yeah,
I like both results. And
yeah,
especially, you're right, if you see something faster than just 24 frames a second for Gemini Man, which I think I saw 48,
yeah,
and it's incredible. Irishman, the thing that is really impressive, but you kind of have to get over it early, is that what Martin Scorsese was doing was making younger versions of those actors, but not necessarily ones that had to look like a younger Joe Pesci or
yeah,
Robert De Niro. They're like characters.
yeah.
And once you realize that he was trying to make younger versions of characters, it's brilliant.
I know.
But a lot of people saw a young Bob De Niro who was meant to be 30 or
Yeah, yeah,
25 or I don't know, can't remember what it was. And people were like, "Oh, that doesn't look right."
yeah, yeah. Don't
But
get me started
when
with
you
that.
realize,
Don't get me started with that.
yeah,
With the deep fake videos of saying we fixed it. Like I that was the entire discussion last week on my call-in show on Twitch, and I feel like people really have the wrong idea. I know what you mean. Like back then when this came out, people really went to YouTube making videos about how bad it was and how badly it was made, and they could do it better with deepfake, making a younger version looking like Taxi Driver, Robert De Niro. That was not the intent at all. Like the intent
no,
was
I
to
don't think
make.
it was.
No, it wasn't. No, he speaks about that
Mm,
on the behind the scenes, and he speaks about that on the Blu-ray. He speaks about the fact that they were making younger versions of these people, not the actors. And that's
mm,
what people didn't get from the deepfake. But don't get me started with the deepfake. The deepfake also has the issue that most of these people on YouTube, basically clickbait videos, what they're doing is like they're working the deepfake on top of the already
yeah,
made visual effects, which has
not from scratch.
hundreds of people working on
Yeah,
it. I would have loved for them to make it with the original plate. They would not get that far. So it's a really disrespectful thing of just, oh, I fixed it. Like it's not that simple. And not to mention the constraints of a budget, the constraints of timelines, of deadlines, and the constraints of a director, of client feedback, of a studio feedback. These things can't be done that way like people think with a click, deepfake, and it's done. There's still extensive amount of compositing and cleanup being done even on the deep fakes, although a lot of YouTubers don't talk about that side. So, yeah, I find it fascinating how that erupted. Irishman and also, of course, Mandalorian erupted this this chatter about how to do these films. But I think that's another conversation. But yeah, don't get me wrong, Ian. I don't feel like I think one is better than the other. I'm just mentioning, as you know, as being a director, I prefer to have a more clean set, and I understand that I understand where Martin Scorsese is coming from. I do. I feel like I understand why he wouldn't want the markers, why he doesn't want so much tech around the actors.
yeah.
I've also done shoots with
Well,
mocap. I love them as well, but it's for
yeah,
different projects. I understand in this project, it's literally like a gangster movie with these really famous actors that are they have so much weight on them from The Godfather, from
yeah.
Goodfellas. I don't think you could have markers on Robert De Niro and Al
But
Pacino.
what I agree. It was a really interesting workflow and
Yeah,
fascinating to see if they'll use it again. I guess in that vein, though, Hugo, there's a whole lot of compositing techniques for de-aging that don't use markers
yeah,
and that seem to be very successful.
yeah,
Um, so that could be the approach that you would want to take. I mean,
yeah. That's
one of
because I'm a
one of the
compositor at heart. Yes, I
yeah,
guess that's why. Yeah,
and I'm always fascinated by the fact that like there are these films that out there now where multiple studios do de-aging work on the same characters. Captain Marvel is this fascinating example of that, where Samuel L. Jackson and other characters needed to be younger. And I think just because of the volume of work and the shot allocation, there's like four studios behind that.
yeah,
And that was Lola, Rising Sun,
yeah,
SS VFX, and possibly ILM might have done a
yeah.
couple of shots. I'm not 100% sure. And they all use slightly different techniques. Lola is like big on flame,
Mm-hmm.
which in some ways is relatively
Yeah,
unusual.
like I
And
like the mill would is as well. Yeah,
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 and SSVFX and Rising Sun, I know used Nuke to do it. But
yeah,
look, they use scans of the actors. They use texture photography, of course, multiple techniques to do it. Um, Maybe the most hands-off thing is the compositing approach in a way, especially if you're not even using dots.
yeah.
Um,
It is.
but
Yeah,
some of the
yeah,
dots work for tracking
yeah,
purposes.
yeah.
Um, I would also say there's an interesting development with this, which is not just de-aging, but aging.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the most successful aging is, in my opinion, is Lola, having done it for Agent um, Old Peggy
Yeah,
in one of the
Agent
Captain
Carter.
America
Yeah,
films.
yeah,
Yeah, and also in Endgame with Captain America,
yeah,
where they use a combination of stand-ins, the real actor, makeup effects. Um, I mean, what's fascinating to me about it really is that if they never told us that they did it, we probably would assume it was a makeup actor,
yeah, yeah.
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So, or make an actor in makeup. And so the fact that we're even able to talk about it is kind of cool.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right.
Mm.
Well, that again, it kind of segues a bit to what you were talking about compositing. Compositing is at the heart of all of this. It is really, to be honest, like especially on Martin Scorsese's film on Irishman. There's a huge amount of pipeline and compositing being done there together with Flux. But the reason why that's how it's done is because in compositing you can have this kind of 2.5D approach, where you are basically on some shots you can get away with some brushing and you can get away with some patches and you can track in certain sections of the maybe from another B-roll or another take, sometimes stitching takes together, or sometimes even just brushing or blurring or using techniques of sharpening and blurring and softening certain parts and keeping other parts with detail. I've done that many times in productions,
Yeah.
both at the mill, both at my work after the mill, and even on short films. I've done a lot of that. Sometimes we have the dots so it can help us, and depending on the shot. So there's like a completely 2D approach, which is a handmade brushing, almost Photoshoppy almost type of technique that is really, I love it and I really enjoy doing it. And most artists really enjoy doing it as well in compositing. Then you have like the 2.5D like technique, which you're basically using the performance, but then you're tracking the actor's head in 3D, and then you basically project the footage that was shot into the mesh of the geometry, and then you open up the geometry almost like one of these chocolates that you open up the little silver plastic open,
Yeah.
and then you basically paint on top and then wrap it again after you paint it. So that's kind of like a more 2D, 2.5D approach, which is what you started to see a lot on Benjamin Button, and then it kind of evolved more. And then, of course, then full CG integration, which sometimes the CG integration is merging sections in CG with the real ones and kind of combining both of them. So there are definitely 3, 4, like there's a lot of different techniques being used. None of them are better than others, and a lot of companies, it's a craft really. And to be honest, it really depends on the artist you have and the team you have and the people you have behind you. So in some companies, they might, like you said with Flame, if you have a company like the Mill with strong flame artists that are so used to painting and doing beautification, they're so fast at it, you might just go with that approach because it's so much faster. They are so used to just painting motion blur and painting wrinkles, and they do it so quickly with their Wacom tablet. It's like it's like they've been doing it for 20 years. And other companies have a bigger pipeline with tracking data inside Nuke for projection systems. And of course, other companies do the full CG route, which is the most expensive way, of course. And a lot of companies try to use the 2D, but it really depends. You can only do the 2D version or the 2D half version if you have talented artists that can paint that well or make that kind of work. If you don't have people that are used to or even experienced with paint over or experience with beautification work, then you might not be able to rely on that type of technique. So it is definitely a fascinating topic, and there's a lot of types of techniques out there. There's no one solution fits all, for sure.
I would say also the interesting thing is that people are often critical of these studios by saying, "Oh, why didn't you just use machine learning?" Well, they are using machine learning.
They are, yeah.
ILM had this tool called Face Finder, which was part of using training data of the actors to get a base level of them at a certain age.
They had 2 years. They investigated they researched for 2 years, and it's funny, isn't it? Because they do use deepfake, they do use machine learning, they do use AI. It's just that they don't use it like people on YouTube use it. It's custom-made tools, and it's a different approach. And also sometimes you actually have to go to SIGGRAPH or even to a keynote to even see that kind of work, to see the papers of what they're making. It's not that easy to showcase that on the breakdown. It's not as, and also it's not as popular or famous to show that way. But yeah, it's really interesting how it's going, and it's now even trickling to commercials. Even you saw last year with Bill and Ted on the Mill with the big commercial they did for the Super Bowl. It's becoming so available, and it's becoming so not cheap, but it's becoming so much more commonplace in mainstream that you even start to see it in TV shows, you're starting to see it on commercials, you're starting to see it even on short films, in smaller productions. And like you said on the start of this conversation, it really is for the imagination, isn't it? Because now the screenwriters and the directors can really work with whatever they want, and they can kind of make it happen. That's the place where we're reaching, right? Like if you have flashback sequences, we can actually do them now without just casting whoever actor to do it, which used to be how they would do it,
Yes. And I would say the only other thing to talk about perhaps before we wrap up is the technical side of this is very achievable because they've shown it can be done. There's a whole nother discussion about uncanny valley stuff, which is just by seeing a younger Robert Downey Jr., where we know that that's not him, right? Yeah. And so we don't need to get into the weeds on that. But I actually ran a panel a couple of years ago at the View conference, and it was with Paul Debevec, Janelle Croshaw, who was one of the VFX soups on Captain Marvel, Trent Claus, who was from Lola, and
I remember this. I was there. I remember. Right. I was on the audience.
And so lots of questions came up, including like, okay, you can do it, but can you convince the audience to get over the hump of you're actually seeing someone who they know doesn't exist? That's an issue. Then the other issue was about deep fakes. And back then, now that was maybe 3 years ago, Hugo, the consensus was that any kind of deep fake algorithm wasn't actually producing anything with enough high fidelity, sorry. And I wonder whether maybe that has moved on a bit, and we don't talk so much about the deep fakeness of it. We talk about the machine learning techniques behind it. So that's a separate thing. But I do think this is wrapped up in a whole different thing about we're responding to a character on screen that we know isn't real. So does that make our brains think that it's not real to begin with?
Yeah.
That's one of the challenges of these shots and whether they work or not work. I would say what happens also is when you watch these things in a movie, you kind of like, oh, cool, they're doing a young Rock or young Dwayne Johnson. It's kind of like, I kind of feel like it's a bit of part of the spectacle. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on with this
Yeah. It's
de-aging,
really
youthification
interesting
stuff.
what you're saying. It is true that it will be difficult for us to go through and accept them as young because we know that they don't exist. Either they're dead or they are very old or they're not even looking like that at
Yeah.
all. That's always going to be a problem, a struggle, and of course the clickbaitiness of deepfake that has been happening for the last year. The way that they pretend that they're fixing things is not helping the discussion, especially because mainstream media is talking about it like a fix or something. Um, I really want to say to everyone in the audience people need to also understand that a production has constraints and there's no infinite money. There's not a blank check, so you can only do as much as you can. I would never judge a production if they've managed to really get there with photorealism or not, because you don't know how much budget they had or how much time or how much constraint they had from the production point of view to actually reaching. Sometimes this is very difficult work, and I really respect these companies because they're doing groundbreaking work. I know that in 10 years, no one is even going to buy an eyelash. The people are going to like look at it, oh, another one, because it's going to start to become so much better. And to answer your question about deepfake, yes, deepfake is getting much closer. It's getting much better, although it's still not there yet, no. If you really look at it in full screen, or if you find the few deepfakes that in 4K, you can still see the edges, you can still see the issues, you can still see the motion blur issues, the grain issues. Not so much visible because people tend to watch YouTube on a little phone, so they don't notice those things. But if you would have watched it on a big screen, I've done that test. I found some of this really awesome deepfake made with Tom Cruise when he's running on a field. And I watched it in 4K on my monitor. I watched it really big with a 15-inch, and I see all the issues. So imagine on the cinema, you would have even seen it more. You would have seen all the issues with the light trapping, with the edges, with the roto, with everything. Yeah. So it's definitely not there yet. It is going to become better and better. I'm sure that it maybe in 10 years from now or maybe 5 years from now, it's going to become more seamless. But definitely these studios are all taking advantage of this, for sure. They're hiring people that are specialized in deepfake. Just the other day, you saw a very famous YouTuber was hired by ILM to join, the YouTuber. He was making several videos where he was fixing the Mandalorian, and then he got hired by ILM. So they are definitely looking into this. They're definitely using this technology. It's just that people are more used to seeing the negative videos, the clickbaity videos about it. I'm quite positive about this. I feel like the technology is really getting there. It's the feeling I had when I was watching Jungle Cruise. In certain moments in Jungle Cruise on those environments, I felt like I was there. Like it is starting to become really impressive, all these things. But yeah.
I just have 3 quick points on de-aging, and then we should wrap up. I forgot to mention Guy Williams from Weta Digital was on that panel at View as well, talking about Gemini Man. So it was an insane panel. Another studio I'd call out doing some amazing de-aging work kind of silently, quietly, is Gradient Effects. And they have some software called Shapeshifter, which is really cool. Check out some of their results. And then I have to say, my favorite de-aging work from recent times is that scene in Terminator Dark Fate.
Oh, yeah.
When young Arnie kills John Connor.
Yeah.
And it's a short scene on a beach. I am just like flabbergasted whenever I see that. Yeah. And as I understand it, yes, they used the reference from back in the 90s. They had the actors come in for photo shoots. Linda Hamilton was part of the production, and Arnie was too. But as I understand it, was fully digital character work from ILM.
Yeah.
It's flawless. I think it's incredible, and I just think it works because it's a standalone sequence. It's pretty short. It's in slow-mo, some of it. But anyway, I really wanted to shout it out. I was just like,
It's a huge.
I was. It was
It
amazing.
is amazing. It's a huge. It's probably the best part of the film. It's probably one of the best parts of the film. And they also remade that sequence when the punks are there waiting, and then Arnie shows up as well. They've made him as well.
So that was in Genesis.
Yeah,
and that was
exactly,
MPC,
Genesis. Yeah.
which did an amazing job. And the film before that, which was Terminator Salvation,
Yeah.
was ILM doing a full digital Arnie, which I reckon is really successful.
Yeah.
But it's also shot design. There's a lot of shots of his legs, but cut into his face.
Yeah.
And beautiful work with some subsurface scattering for back whenever that was. Anyway, but
I'm glad you've mentioned this,
de-aging,
because this shot from Terminator is mind-blowing, and it is very successful for sure. It's one of the best ones. I also really recommend people really going deeper into Gemini Man, because I don't know if they are available, some of the keynotes we saw in the View conference, or even other behind the scenes that are out there. I've seen some of them on the Blu-ray. Gemini Man, Veta goes deep into the skin, the pores, the flesh, even the vein system, the muscle system. It is groundbreaking work and stunning work. Oh my God, my mouth was open when I was watching the View conference keynote about this project. When he was presenting, what was his name?
I mean, we know that Weta can do. We know that Weta can do digital humans, which is what Will Smith in that film is a couple of times over. But you've got to remember that they're making a younger version.
Yeah.
And that's almost about creative choices.
Yeah.
They're not just allowed to make Bad Boys 2, Bad Boys Will Smith. They have to make a director approved, an actor approved.
Yeah. It's not like deepfake. It's not like deepfake where they just make up whatever. Yeah, I know what you mean.
I think it's fascinating challenge. Apparently it might be around, but there's this footage that Weta Digital had to make, which was a test of a young digital Will Smith in the car with Martin Lawrence. Is he from Bad Boys?
Yeah.
Like a piece of test footage to show that they could do a digital young Will Smith.
But
it's incredible. If I haven't seen it, I'm pretending I've imagined it was so good.
One little joke you saw on the behind the scenes of Gemini Man, you saw one of the journalists is asking Will Smith, is he going to do a new season of Prince Bel-Air, because now they have this digital version of Will Smith, so they could actually make season, I don't know how many seasons it had, like season 7 or season 8, a new version with a full digital Will Smith. Imagine that, like making a new version of Prince Bel-Air. That would be quite funny, I think. Maybe I'll make it into a reality, and it will become a reality if I now speak about it.
Aren't they doing a new Bel-Air? Anyway, I mean, Will Smith doesn't seem to age anyway, does he?
No, it doesn't. That was also a challenge, wasn't it, Ian, if you think about it? Because we are so used to seeing a lot of people back then complain about that. Oh, he just looks the same. He doesn't. He really doesn't. He looks so much younger. But he is one of those actors that looks stunning. He looks so well. He looks so good still. For a 50-year-old man, he's like, it is very impressive.
Yeah. I've got here from my notes of Guy Williams presenting at the VFX Bake Off for Gemini Man. What have I got here? He said, asked whether the high frame rate meant things like tracking, etc. was easier. The comment was, not really. And I think it's hard to communicate how the whole room laughed, for that during that presentation. But
it makes things much harder if you think about it. He also talked about that in terms of the simulations, the explosions at the end of the film with all the fire. Man, that show is probably one of the hardest, most complicated things I've seen in my life. And props to them, like amazing artistry being displayed on that show. Like I feel like those artists that was groundbreaking work on that film for sure. And the film is good as well. I really like the film as well. Really like the film. Really nice action flick, isn't it? Like the sequences, the motorcycle and everything. Maybe we'll talk about that film one day, because it has a lot to say for sure.